Evening, everyone, and welcome to the July 14th, 2025 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this hybrid meeting format. For work sessions like this one, there is no opportunity for public comment. Those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website or on broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling in to one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcasts and meetings materials page of the City of Eugene website. In case of medical emergency, an automated external defibrillator, an AED, is located on the counter behind the staff, located to your left on the west side of the council chamber. And in case of an emergency evacuation, emergency exits are through the double doors located at the back of the room. The doors to the patio can also be used as needed. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and I now call the July 14th, 2025 City Council work session to order. And I now turn to the City Manager to introduce our first topic this evening, a work session on long-range financial stability framework.
Great, thank you, Mayor, Council President, Council. I'm here today with our Chief Financial Officer, Twyla Miller. We're going to co-present today's presentation, and I'm just trying to see if that's going to work. There we go. Not sharing it. I'll pause it and try it again. All right. I can just give my fingers to work, we're in the money. Really looking forward to tonight's conversation, which really builds on a lot of previous direction you've given to me, and specifically over the last 6 months, on a desire to look more long range at stability and some of your cost and revenue needs. And clearly, based on the last budget cycle, we have a growing need for more structured and a more long-term approach to how we plan together. So tonight, we're actually going to cover 2 items. The first is the long-range financial planning, and I'm holding out here as the second item, the continuation of your discussion on the options regarding the referendum petition. So there are 2 different items, but I'm going to hold the space, especially because we're in a little bit of a different format tonight. The first part of tonight's conversation will focus on the history and context of our financial planning, some of our strategic rhythm, some of the focus that we've had, and then I'll shift over to Twyla to talk about some of the elements of financial planning, and we'll end on the ad hoc committee. I'm really hoping tonight that we can get direction on where to go with the committee so we can get started on that work, and also some direction on where you'd like to go with the referendum petition. So as I was preparing for tonight, I was thinking about this conversation and a desire for a long-term sustainable budget, and I thought, I think we've been trying, and we've had this as a goal maybe my entire career. And I was thinking back on, I remember a workshop in the Bascom-Tykes room on this exact same topic. You may have still been our fire chief, and we had notes up everywhere, but it has been a really long-standing goal of this council to have a long-term budget and to be really stable in how you provide services to the public. So I pulled one of your goals, so you have a handful of vision, values, and goals. This is one of them. Some of the very specific actionables when you last looked at this was you wanted a long-term sustainable budget, you wanted to look at newer expanded revenue sources and accessible and transparent financial information. I would say, in addition to being your goal, it's also been a longstanding expectation of the city manager to be able to deliver on these results. Since I've been in this role, you've adopted a strategic plan, and I really like the way the strategic plan talks about, when you start talking about organizational well-being, you talk about the resources and the services, that you have the right amount of resources and revenues for the right level of services that you need in this community. And as I've been talking with each of you, I've been talking about those being sort of overlapping and almost three-dimensional, but there's some ways in which this conversation, they're also separate. And so as we talk tonight, you're going to see these colors pop up as I start to distinguish between conversations we're having about resources and conversations we're having about services. Forgot about that catchy animation. That's okay. So I was also going back through, I've been communicating the need to be in this kind of strategic cycle since I first was in this role. And I remember it started with a conversation about the budget and somebody saying, shouldn't we be setting our priorities before we set the budget? It felt like we had things in the wrong order. And so I had introduced this diagram talking about, yes, ideally that's what you're doing. We're going out to the community, we're asking about their needs, how they're experiencing us. We're taking that input, that we're using that to drive your goals, your strategic plan, and then that focuses the organization, and then we build a budget around that. And that should be kind of an ongoing rhythm. And I drew that the first year, and I think I drew it the second year with a little bit more detail, and I think I've drawn it maybe every year that I've been in this role. Like, here's the cycle, we're trying to be in it. It's not new. And if you think about it, we're not going to actually ever get out of the cycle. You just keep going. It's a spiral. It's good governance. It's good business practice that you're constantly checking in with your customers and adjusting your priorities, and you're adjusting your budget. Another way to look at it is I like to think about the solid foundation that this organization has had around financial stewardship for many, many decades. You think about it as a tree. So if you go back to that first year, that was kind of the policies and budget we were building on, and then the next year, we built on that. The next year, we built on that. This year, we'll build on it again. And in the future, beyond my days and beyond your days, people are going to continue to build on how do we get more strategic and more efficient over time. So back to this initial rhythm and what we're going to talk about tonight around how we plan for and move forward. We're actually in the lower part of this arc. And so I'm just bringing it back to say, hey, we just adopted a budget, and we're actually right where we should be right now. We'll be monitoring that budget. We'll be getting feedback from the public. We're coming back in September with the results of a community survey, which will then feed into how you want to continue to prioritize your work. So we are doing sort of exactly what we should be doing. I'm going to talk about two different, when you think about that spiral and circle, I'm going to talk about two different arcs of focus. And the first one's going to be a longer term arc, because as I've been talking to you and talking to community members about what is it that's driving some of the urgency around this work, for many people, it's really related to the sort of the next 6 years. And I know long range is beyond 6 years, but it's when you adopted the budget and you adopted a stormwater fee that should expire or be considered or whatever we're going to do with it in 31, that sets a 6-year horizon. So then you kind of come back and you're going to be talking, actually Wednesday, you'll get a library levy report, and in the fall, you'll need to make a decision about that. We'll be coming around and next year talking about what you want to do with the Parks and Rec levy. We'll be talking about the road bond in 2027. You'll be talking about the CSPT, so the Community Safety Payroll Tax. You'll be getting a report back from the committee that's been overseeing that, and from the city manager. You'll make a decision about whether you want to continue that and put it out to a vote. And you'll be doing all of that before you adopt your next biennial budget. Then you'll have another biennial budget. So we have all of these touch points. So even in this 6-year time frame, you're going to talk about the library levy twice, which suddenly makes it seem like a really long time, but it goes by fast. The other piece I want to point out, which is a point of tension, I believe, and I feel like I need to daylight it publicly, is that you'll have this conversation about the payroll tax in 2027. If you choose at that time to put it out to a vote, and that doesn't make it or it makes it, it's happening mid-biennial, which is going to be really challenging. It's going to be challenging for you to build a budget in 27, 29, not knowing what's going to happen with that. It'll be challenging mid-biennium if for some reason that goes away. So it would have been ideal had it been pushed, but at the time we weren't in a biennial budget, so we didn't plan for that. I just want to point it out because I think it is going to be a future point of tension that we should start talking about. So now I'm going to switch back to a year. This is not animated. Again, I just want to talk about what's going to happen over the next year. This is just a sampling. This is not everything. But we're starting tonight with long-range planning, and we're going to turn around and start talking about the levy and this ad hoc committee. The ad hoc committee ideally regardless if it's a city manager committee or council committee, you'll be getting updates about that over the next, at least, I would say, 5 to 6 months. You'll have a supplemental budget during that time. You'll have a retreat in this time, and we'll somehow adopt a long-range plan during that time. And the stars sort of indicate what are those points of information that you're going to be getting from finance, which Twyla is going to talk about in a little bit, that'll help inform that. On the other side, we'll be talking about services with the community survey, the strategic plan. You're going to be talking about economic development, some of our urban growth strategies, a new city manager. There's a lot of things going on that both kind of work together over time. So with that, I'll give it to you, Twyla, and then it'll come back to me.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. Twyla Miller, our Chief Financial Officer, and I'll start off by talking about financial planning. So staff are continuing to expand our long-range financial planning efforts as we come into our second biennium. Long-range financial planning involves evaluating revenues, expenditures, and key factors such as unfunded needs, our debt capacity, assessing risks, and external economic analysis to develop strategies as we look to the future. When we think about the time horizon, we think about this in three areas. The first is near term, so that's really the budget cycle we're in. This is the budget that began July 1st. Midterm is really 2 to 6 years, so that 6-year forecast horizon that we often bring you when we're having budget conversations. And then long-term is really 6 plus, so looking 7, 10, 15 years out as a long-term strategy. So staff will be working this summer to update our unfunded needs assessment, looking at that 10-year horizon. We'll also be updating our forecasts and doing some other analysis to bring foundational work to council this winter as you start to have your long-range financial stability conversations. This will allow for a holistic look as we review financial policies, service priorities, and the role of development and other potential mid and long-term strategies. Next slide. So the outcome of the overall process, the long-range financial stability outcomes are shown here. So the first is to create a common knowledge of financial levers in our financial condition, city services, funding needs, and other mechanisms. To develop a prioritization framework to guide staff and policymakers as future decisions are made. To identify strategies to address the structural imbalance in the general fund, distressed funds, and other funding needs across the organization. And to develop financial resiliency through identification of potential risks and causes of fiscal stress, including the development of safety measures to help withstand future financial shocks to our system. And then this slide is really showing the suggested process for this work, which includes an ad hoc committee. So as I talk here, I'll talk a bit about the process of the committee, and then the city manager will talk about the structure of potential structures of the committee in just a bit. So the ad hoc committee work would begin after your summer break. The focus of the group would be on the near to midterm, or that 6-year time horizon. The committee would receive information on general fund revenues, services provided by the general fund, and alternate sources for services historically funded through the general fund, such as library and park levies, the stormwater fee, and the community safety payroll tax. The committee could make recommendations on efficiencies, cost management strategies, future gap strategies, such as the general fund gap that will occur when the additional stormwater rate increase sunsets in 6 years, other revenue options, and suggestions for long-term economic considerations. If this committee is formed as a city manager committee, those recommendations would come back through the city manager as part of your winter work. If the committee is formed as a council committee, those reports would come directly back to council. Council would have a series of work sessions or a longer retreat in winter of 2026 to focus on long-range financial stability, looking through a longer lens over, again, that 10-year time horizon. Council would receive the following information to inform discussions on stabilization and long-term stability. A financial condition update on the general fund and distressed funds, which would also include information on risk and external economic analysis. An unfunded needs assessment with information on future needs over a 10-year period, including capital infrastructure, equipment and technology, and operational and program needs as we look to the future. This would include capacity enhancements and priority items that we've previously funded on a one-time basis with one-time dollars. A financial policy review and service prioritization discussion, and also strategy development. And this would include revenues, economic development, annexation, tax reform, and other levers that the council would choose to review. So these conversations would refine our long-range financial planning, help us develop a prioritization framework, and strategies coming into the second year of the biennium as budget development would begin in the second year of the biennium, which would begin a year from now. And with that, I'll turn things back to Sarah.
Great, thank you. I'm going to dip back into your council goals with, and talk a little bit about education engagement, because you've also had a longstanding goal to be really transparent and interactive with the community, to involve the community pretty broadly, to be equitable, and to build stronger partnerships. So I'm building back into that because as we went through the budget process, I heard a lot from you and from the public about a need for broader, deeper communications. So there was, some of you have talked about even doing your own series of videos to help educate people on the budget, not just one of you, multiple of you. We've talked about the need for really getting more information out about what we learned in the community survey. So we know coming into it, that's why we put some one-time dollars in to help supplement that communication, that there's going to be a lot of need to help educate people on where we're at, why we're here, and kind of what we're doing to solve the problem in a long-term way. One aspect of that, not the only aspect of that, is pulling together a group of, I'm starting to think of them as technical advisors on financial issues. So we've talked a lot about this, but not, really deep into the hopes and dreams. But as I've been meeting with folks, it's been feeling like it really needs to be a group of experts, people that really understand finance and operations, have some expertise in revenues, development. Could be that there's somebody on the group that understands government finance, but not a current city employee. Folks that join this, and the reason why I'm saying 8 to 10 is they're really going to need to be able to commit to a pretty significant amount of time if you want to do that work this fall. They're committing to doing a lot of learning and being open to learning, and also being open to doing outreach and helping be part of our communication strategy. We'll make a decision tonight about whether they're advising the city manager or whether they're a city council advisory group, and other considerations. So I was hoping tonight we could talk about that. In talking with a handful of community members, it feels like some of that work's going to need to be co-created. So we don't want to go in with like, here's the agenda and here's what it has to be, but it has to be like, here's the type of person we're looking for, and these are generally the conversations we're going to have. I went back to the tree ring reference because it has felt like it needed to be a fresh start, new faces and people that are not necessarily the folks we always hear from. So with that, we would spend kind of between now and September preparing for that, identifying who the members might be, inviting them, identifying some type of outside facilitator for that work, and developing the education and resources in order to launch that work in September, where we would be, one idea is that they try to wrap up by December. Again, thinking about that arc of focus and the urgency people feel around, hey, we're going to turn around in the spring and have some conversations about multiple levies, and do you want this work to inform that? And to also ground you in some of the information you may want in your retreat. Currently thinking about January and beyond, or early winter, as being a good time for the council retreat, that you have developed some information and education for that, but that's what we're here tonight to talk about and hear what your interests are. So we'll spend some time doing that, discussing, getting some feedback on this. These are not questions you have to follow. They're just things I was thinking about. And there's a motion. There's two motions that you have, one on the formation of the committee, and then we want to make sure we have time saved to shift to the initiative petition discussion. With that, I'll just pause there. Turn it back to Council President.
So, do we have anyone who wants to start this conversation off? Thoughts from council? Councilor Groves, you start us off.
Thank you, Council President. Oh, it must have been on to begin with. All right. Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Twyla, for this presentation. I want to emphasize that this group we've asked for is a technical group, and that's more for the community that's listening in. And I think we're looking for people with particular skills, as you mentioned, where when we get to prioritization, that would be a broader group broadly representing the community. As far as who this group should report to, I'm fine either way. However, I would like to say when we get the report out, I would like the whole committee, ad hoc committee, to be available for questions from us. And that's not that we don't trust you, or it's not that I don't trust you. It just, I think it's important when we start getting into the recommendations that people understand kind of where they have come from and why. And so in the interest of transparency, I think it's important that the report out and our questions of this group are done in a public meeting. So I'm really looking forward to this process. I think we've needed it for some time. I think it will help reinforce that really the city is well managed and well run. But sometimes it's good to have somebody from the outside, a disinterested third party, come in and take a look, although I'd like to think anyone from our community will be interested in what we do. But those are just some initial thoughts. I may want to have a second round, but for now, I think I'll just stop there. And again, I'm excited to see where this goes.
Next up, I have Councilor Clark, and then following Councilor Clark, Councilor Zelenka.
Thank you, sir. Sarah, thank you. Twyla, thank you very much for the presentation. Familiar information. I'm going to name the elephant in the room, the unfortunate one, the one I don't like, which is that at the end of the calendar year, one of the folks at the table is going to retire. And I think that has to be an important part of the conversation. As a result, I think this ought to be a manager's committee, because come January, we're going to have a new manager. And that manager is going to need to not only buy into a process they didn't start, but have a special handoff from you of, here's why I picked these folks, here's what, I think that the closer the city manager is working with this committee, the easier it will be to hand off to a new city manager and a more smooth and seamless transition that can take place. The new city manager may have new ideas about stuff, and that's great, they can add to it, but the continuity will be that the manager's committee will be doing the work you started and they will probably finish. So I think that's an important distinction we need to, I hope my colleagues will agree to. So thank you.
Councilor Zelenka, and then I have Councilor Leach.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot like Randy, that this is kind of phase one, phase two, where phase one is an investigation into the budget and phase two is the visioning or course setting. And they're different and they're separate and they're different groups and they're different efforts. The phase one investigation into the budget, and I think that needs to focus around how does the budget work? What are its drivers? What are the constraints? What are the options that we have in front of us? And an opportunity for experts and people who are very interested to investigate specific ideas about what they think is efficient. I mean, you're never going to convince the people that think that government is inherently inefficient, so they're probably not going to be on the committee anyway. But those people that are open-minded can be on the committee and they can have maybe some good ideas with the twofold goal of having a common understanding about how the budget works and what the services we provide, and also assessing whether or not we're effective and efficient in delivering those services. And I think the outcome is similar to Randy's, where I think what we'll find is the city of Eugene is exceptionally well run. It's very efficient and it's very effective. And it's on par with any private business that I've seen in Eugene and around the state of Oregon. So, and better than most, actually. And since the other part of it is that since we've had 13 to 16 cut budgets, 60 million plus in cuts, that's resulted in tremendous increases in efficiency and elimination of all the redundant services. And now we're at the point of eliminating whole services or parts of services instead of having tweaks in the system that would save us money. I'd be surprised if we found any really significant operational savings because it is so well run. On the part two, I think all that's fine, and it should feed into part two or phase two, and that needs to go beyond just the investigation, and we've got to figure out what we do with that information, and that should be more broadly represented, and with multiple points of view. And the questions there are, what does it mean to be a city? Is it more than just fire and police? If so, how far does it go beyond that? Why do people live here? If you can choose to live anywhere, why do they live here? That's our competitive advantage. We want to make sure that we maintain that and that we fund all those things that make that, sustainably fund all those things that make that our competitive advantage and attract people to be here and stay here. So that's kind of my vision for phase two. In the short run, I think.
Yeah, when you run out of time. Want a second round?
Yep.
All right. Second round for Councilor Zelenka. Councilor Leach.
Thank you, Council President, and to our City Manager and Twyla for the presentation. I think that there's just so much here that needs to be discussed, and any one committee with such a short time frame is not going to be able to address all of this. So we're thinking about that urgent need for, input around that midterm up to 6 years and how we're going to move forward. And then also, and that's really, City Manager Advisory Committee directly to the City Manager versus this other strategy of looking at all of those different pieces, like you mentioned, urban renewal, urban reserves, RUGB, annexation. These are really huge topics that I think are going to take a lot longer for people, even people that are experts in finance to wrap their heads around even culturally. I think of annexation as one of those that's going to need a more of a deep dive. So forgive me for this question. Is it possible to hold both of these committees, one addressing the urgent need and addressing the transition of our city manager and having kind of that, like Councilor Clark mentioned, ability to have this kind of nice segue into our new city manager. And then also really thinking about a committee for the council that will work on some of those priority policy level decisions in terms of long-term economic development.
Councilor Kuczynski.
That was actually a
question.
question.
That was
Yeah.
a question. Okay, I'm sorry.
I
And
think
after you answer the
yeah,
question.
as I'm understanding the question, you're asking, could we staff two committees at the same time? And that would be pretty challenging to do and maybe a little confusing for the committee members. Feels more like
I'm more thinking of like the city manager one, you said kind of through the fall, have some recommendations by the end of the year. In the fall, we can start talking about, in the AIS, it said in September, we would, if we chose the council direction, we would come back and start to think about and talk about kind of what it is we want in that. And we can set that as maybe even beyond the retreat. So thinking about more like spring 2026, engaging in this long-term strategy committee. So kind of not stacking them on top of one another, but concurrent.
Yeah, let me just clarify the timing piece. So if it's a council committee, then how that typically, so there's two different ways to have an ad hoc committee by code, one of which is a city council committee. If that's the case, then we'll need to spend the summer coming back with recommendations around, so if you do it by code, the mayor typically nominates the members. We need to have a charter of what they're going to do, a beginning, kind of a end date. And so we would be coming back in September, and you would have to adopt, like, yes, those are the members. You have to approve that, the charter, the dates, the members. So you would be doing that in September. The same things are sort of true for the city manager committee. We still have to, I still have to identify members. We would spend the summer doing that. The only real difference is that you wouldn't be approving the members and you wouldn't be approving the charter. We could just get started quicker on that. So we'll both be operating through the fall. That will be operating through the fall. So I guess my recommendation would be, see what happens with that work. That could still be a council committee. I actually don't know where the majority of the council is going to fall on that. See where that goes. Let that help inform the work we bring to the retreat. And if there's a need to have another council committee that looks at services and priorities, that we would address that at the time. But staffing both of those at the same time would be really hard.
Okay, thank you. I think I would like us to move forward more quickly, so I would suggest the city manager committee. However, is that able to be publicly broadcast? I think that was the other piece. Like Councilor Groves, I think the community needs to be able to see and hear what it is that's being discussed.
Yeah, there's pros and cons both ways. I think we talked about this the last time. Are we able to? Yes. Is it the right direction? I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we had a revenue, committee was it almost 2 years ago? And I really did appreciate the ability to not have it publicly broadcast, so we could get into these like nitty-gritty conversations without kind of this fear of, talking about specifics when you're discovering a lot of different information. But in this process, I think it's important to be public with that. And so I think I'm running out of time, but I'm interested in hearing what the rest of the counselors have to say.
Counselor, you're out of time. And next on my list is Counselor Kaczynski, then Counselor Keating, and Counselor Ye.
Thank you, and thank you, City Manager and Twyla, for the presentation. Just to be clear, there is a large sense of urgency surrounding this work, and it sounds like, if I'm understanding correctly, a City Manager committee would be able to get started a little bit sooner, would perhaps be a little bit less logistically challenging to manage, and so would be able to maybe get more in depth with the work in a more urgent fashion than a council committee. Is that right? I see you nodding. Okay. So I wanted to clarify that. The second thing I wanted to ask about was in the slide with the difference of the committees and sort of talking about the scope of the ad hoc committee. I know that one of the criticisms some of the members of the revenue committee that came out with the fire fee had was that we didn't talk about on that committee the potential for cuts or the potential for changes in level of service and things like that. I noticed that one of the things that you have listed on here as part of the scope of the ad hoc committee is efficiencies. And I hear the word efficiencies being used as sort of a euphemism for two different types of things. One is sort of process improvements, where we can deliver our services in a way that delivers the same level of service for less cost. And the other way I hear it is sometimes as a euphemism for cuts, for saying we should not be delivering this service or we should not be delivering this service at this level. I know that some people in the community want to have that conversation about what are the level of services, what are the services we're going to prioritize. Is that, and I think that this particular committee about financial planning is probably not the place to be having that discussion, because that's something that's more about values and strategy and things like that. And so I think it's probably helpful for us to be clear, like when we're talking about efficiencies, are we talking about cuts, prioritization, levels of service discussions, or are we talking about hey, is there a way that we could do this thing in a way that costs less money?
Thank you. I think you hit that sort of razor edge thin line, and is exactly why I've been talking about sort of resources and services. And as I see this group, I think it's really important to focus in on the technical nature of it, which is not should we or shouldn't we be doing a certain thing. That said, I also don't want to start and work again with a committee that feels like they were told they couldn't talk about something. So there is a level of co-creation, I think, that has to happen at the beginning so that the whole process is credible. The intent is not to have this group setting service levels. That's a different conversation. It is an opportunity to look at, are there things from a different business model that we could consider? You know, are there different ways of doing whatever the thing is? But I do think for this exact reason, it's going to be a lot more important to come back with regular updates about, hey, this is kind of how the work is being chartered. This is what we're talking about. This is what we talked about last time, more frequently than the revenue advisors, because I think there's a lot of fear about that.
Thank you.
Counselor Keating and then Counselor Ye.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, City Manager. Thank you, Twyla. And thank you, colleagues, for chiming in. I want to pick up what I'm hearing Councilor Leach put down and voice my interest in exploring a yes and approach. I think that we can do both, but just not both at the same time. I think there's an opportunity to be effective and efficient, as our council goals outline, to empower the city manager to roll with the technical experts that are needed to get the job done, and then reevaluate at the time of transition with a new city manager and explore whether it is prudent to have a council-driven commission-style committee that council oversees for long-term sustainability, that is a long-term investment and staffed and resources provided, similar to how we do the Sustainability Commission, the Police Commission, the Human Rights Commission, et cetera. So I would want to say yes, and double down on my enthusiasm for a long-term council-driven commission to explore the long-term sustainable resources that are needed to keep this city afloat.
Can I respond to that?
Please.
Because when you were speaking, I neglected to talk about one of my bullet points, which is I'm not saying, is that I neglected to talk about the Budget Committee, because the Budget Committee is a committee that is a long-term sustained effort, and I do hear from them that they'd like a broader role. So, and they represent more than just business expertise at the table. So, yes, and. Another and.
And thank you.
Counselor Ye.
Thank you. And thank you, staff, so much for this presentation. So to answer your questions, I think these do sound like the right areas of focus to me. The timing feels doable, which I think is a big part of making these decisions, is what can we handle with our capacity. And so this seems doable to me. I like the idea of staying open to the fact that when we're done with our retreat, we may have additional things that we want the community to look at, and maybe that will be the Budget Committee, and maybe that will be someone else, and maybe it will be the committee we had already, bring them back and have them do, but just, I don't think we're gonna be done with this when our retreat. I think we'll probably have some answers, and we'll probably have even more questions. So I like that idea. I don't know about a permanent new committee. I feel like we have a lot of those, but just staying open to that option, I think, would be a good idea. I am in favor of the committee, the ad hoc committee, reporting to the city manager for a variety of reasons, but mainly I really like Councilor Clark's framing of it, and I think that's really smart to have that transition like that. That was all of your questions. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. And we'll start round two with Counselor Groves and then Counselor Zelenka. And I'll stick my 2 cents in
Thank you,
after that.
Council President. I think my questions have been satisfied at this point, but I will say, I just really want to emphasize that I don't see, at least in the beginning, multiple committees operating at the same time. I think it's step one leads to step two, leads to step three. Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a phased approach. Step one and step two are in sequence. So step one is the investigation informs step two, which is about priorities and setting city budgets. And step one really focuses in on efficiency and effectiveness and not service levels. Although I'm going to differ a little bit here, and I think that this should be a council-driven process for continuity purposes. I think we are going to see a new city manager, and that alone should be enough to make this a city council process as opposed to a city manager process, and for continuity purposes. But we just did a city manager process, and what we saw was the councilors not involved in that ended up objecting to the outcome of what we saw. And we've seen that before, where the people not on the committee didn't agree with what we did. I've seen that several times over my tenure as a councilor. So I think we all need to be involved in this. I think, and we need to be fully engaged and involved in this process from the get-go and have it be a council-driven process. Yes, it's technical, but it's also political. And it's keenly political. That's why we're here. That's why we're having this conversation. And as to the urgency, the difference between the first meeting of a council-driven process and a manager-driven process may be 1 month, maybe 2. And this is much more longer term and more important than that. And then finally, I think because of our retreat we're going to have, that's going to impact what we think and do, especially in maybe phase one, but certainly for phase two. So having it be a council-driven process makes more sense to me for all those reasons.
Other comments in round two? I'll put my 2 cents in here. Alan, I respectfully will disagree with you on this because I think that we're going to get into those broader topics as we get into our council retreat. So we're going to be talking about service deliveries. We're going to be talking about how do we meet those delivery marks given the financial conditions that we're going to be facing over the next 6 years. But more importantly, I think over the next 10 years, because we're going to have to look down the line at both what are the services that we are going to be able to stand up and support as a council and as a community, and what things we're going to have to do differently in order to satisfy the needs of the community. Or there may be some services that we are combining or we are no longer delivering because we can't sustain ourselves in that part of the business. So I am strongly in favor of us having this committee first constituted by the city manager and will lead into the following city manager, the future city manager that can come in and see exactly what we're looking at and get that advice from, the set of experts that I trust our city manager will be able to constitute and put together, and that at every step of the process, we're going to be involved. It's not like we're going to back off and back away from this, but that we will be able to look in and see and watch what's going on, and then be able to, at the end of the process or at where this particular stage ends, we can be informed, involved, and engaged in how we begin to move forward with the other parts of our retreat and some of the things that come out of that. Does anyone else have anything to comment on this, or are we ready, Council Vice President, for a motion?
Ready. Move to.
Hold on. One more comment from Councilor Z.
I agree with what you said at the end, except how engaged were you in the Revenue Advisors Group when you weren't involved in it? You got a report at the end,
Got
and
the
that was, I
report,
think, part of
yeah.
the problem. So I think the council, at its own peril, will let this be driven outside council purview. I think this is inherently a political process. At the same time, it's got a technical aspect to it, but I think not doing it as a council committee is.
Councilor Leach, do we have a motion?
Yes, sir. Move to direct the city manager to create an ad hoc city manager committee to act as a financial technical advisory panel that will begin work in September 2025 and complete work by a date specified by the city manager.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved by Councilor Leach, seconded by Councilor Clark. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Opposed? 1. It passes 7-1. Now we'll move on to our second agenda item tonight, and that is the discussion on the options regarding the referendum petition 2025-1. So, City Attorney,
Yes.
we need to bring this off the table in order to discuss it, or
No, you're
do we
okay.
have to have one of the people who put it on the table to bring it off and bring it back into
No,
play?
it is on the table
On the
right
table,
now. It is
okay.
on the table and seconded, so all you have to do is discuss and then vote.
So do we have any discussion or conversation on this? Well, the motion is to repeal the ordinance and cancel the fire service fee election that was going to be set for sometime this fall. But I think our main thing is to repeal the ordinance with this.
Both of the
particular
motions are
motion.
actually on the slide, so you could see what you initially proposed and then
Okay.
how it got posted.
Got you.
So the one that is on the table and ready to be voted on is that first one, which is the move to repeal ordinance 20171.
So, Counselor.
Thank you, Council President. I just want to say I think it's really important to maintain good faith with the public. I know I voted for the replacement fee based on the initial fire services fee being withdrawn. I certainly intend to vote to withdraw that. I think it would be a really poor form to go forward with two separate fees. Thank you.
Counselor Clark.
Thank you, sir. I will probably vote in favor of this motion. I'm really reluctant to do it, though, I gotta be honest. I think that those people who signed a petition because they wanted to have something to say deserve the opportunity to say it. And I think they wanted to tell us how they felt about it. And I think there are an awful lot of people in our community that want to have a comment about this. But at the same time, I think one of the reasons we came to a compromise as a group was because of the level of dissension and division that would be created in the community to play that all the way to the end of the page. And I suspect a campaign would produce that. And that's why mentioned the idea in the first place of this as a potential compromise, because I don't like the idea of a big community fight, and I think there's a lot of people who would prefer not to, but I feel strange about not letting people have their say when they deserve the opportunity to. So, again, I'll probably vote in favor of moving on and making better plans, but and not having to spend the money and have the argument. But I know there's going to be some people who are disappointed that they didn't get to have their say. And for that, I can only say participate in the process as we move forward to create a better tomorrow. So, thank you.
Counselor Allen.
Yeah, I too reluctantly approach this. I'd really truly love to see what the chamber's argument would be and their campaign would be for this measure. I reluctantly agreed to the compromise. I didn't like it, but I think moving forward in this dual fashion would be not only divisive, but very expensive. I reluctantly would want to move on as well.
All right, others, Counselor Kaczynski.
Yeah, the fire fee went through a lengthy process, lengthy discussion, lots of community discussion prior to being passed by this council because we had a problem that we were trying to solve. And that was a solution to that problem. That was a long-term permanent solution to that problem. And that I still think that as we go through these other processes that we just sort of are saying we're going to set up, we're going to end up back in this same place in a couple of years because a stormwater fee increase, bake sales, whatever the other plans are to fill these gaps, this is one of the best strategies to fill those gaps. And I am very reluctant to say, okay, let's repeal this, because I feel like that says that for me at least, says that I don't believe that it was a good idea to have passed it, and I think it was a good idea to have passed it, so.
Okay. Other comments, counselors? Counselor Ye.
Thanks, Chair. So I'm in favor of repealing it. You know, I want to thank all the people who are willing to come to the table to work out a compromise. It is never easy to admit that you need to think about things differently or you need to take a second shot at things, and folks from all different perspectives were willing to take that step. And the solution we have is not perfect, but I think it's something we can all live with while we move on to the next steps in this process. And to me, continuing to fight this out at the ballot box is taking away time and effort that we could be putting, all sides could be putting in to this committee, to these conversations, to the next step in this process to get to something better. So for me, it makes no sense to continue wasting time and money, any of us spending time and money on this when we can be spending that time more wisely.
Counselor Keating.
Thank you, Council President. Quickly, the compromise that's been alluded to was, in my opinion, good faith efforts by everyone at the table tonight, a great many people who are in the audience tonight, to find common ground and to find a middle ground that not only preserved vital services, but didn't use the fire department as the vehicle to do so. This vote tonight, that I'm in favor of, sends a strong signal to the community wherever you were on the fee, whether you signed the petition or you didn't, whether you were adamantly opposed or you weren't, that we hear you. I encourage a repeal. Thank you, Chair.
Counselor Zelenka.
Yeah, Counselor Kaczynski, I totally agree with everything you said, and I think where we ended up preserved most of what we were trying to preserve. I do think, however, it would be confusing to have this ballot go out on in November. And I totally agree with you that all we did was kick the can down the road. We still have this problem, but I guess where I come down is hopefully this process that we just talked about helps us resolve that. If it doesn't, then we're back in the same exact spot. If it does, then it's worth the effort and the try. And I think having a divisive and expensive and potentially confusing ballot measure out there on a complicated, not well understood mechanism, which is why I didn't like it, isn't going to serve us well.
Anybody else? Councilor Leach?
Thank you. I agree with everything everyone has said. And I also reluctantly will be agreeing with this motion tonight. I think, it would be amazing if we kept this on the ballot and it passed and we could fully fund our fire department and our alternative response and honor the people who put it there. But it is a very expensive, thing to do. It does not honor the whole process that we have gone through to make, to get us to here where I think, it was definitely middle ground that we reached, and we have a lot of work to do. But we are doing that work, and we will continue to do that work. And we will be inviting the community in as much as we can possibly do so to keep making good decisions moving forward. And so I appreciate everyone that has had input through this process and has worked so hard to get us here to this moment. So thank you.
Hey. Not seeing anybody else in the queue, I'm going to ask Councilor Leach to make the motion.
Motion's on the
Sorry.
table.
Okay, yeah, sorry, because I'm thinking, no, I did that before, so I could, never mind. Let's just move ahead. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed? Looks like it passes 7-1. So we are repealing that ordinance. All right? And I think, I think we're done until 7:30. All right, folks.